So the HeyGears Reflex RS is a really interesting machine, and not so long ago I did a video on this where I got my first impressions of it. It's now available for consumer release and it's gone into its 1.0 version of software and beyond that, in fact. So I figured I would do a follow-up video just to let you know my thoughts on how things have progressed, a few of the things that were like teething issues throughout that video. So some things they've managed to fix, some things they can't fix, and there's other things that I've discovered along the way of using it that I want them to add. Not necessarily fix, but additional things that I would like to see on there. Now, full disclosure, this video isn't getting shown to HeyGears. They don't get to see it in advance. But they did send me this machine for a video that I did, which was my hands-on and my early impressions of it. It wasn't a sponsored video. They haven't sponsored the channel. Like I said, they don't get to see this video in advance. But just so that's out there for you. So first things first, let's talk about some of the things that they can't necessarily fix, or that they don't necessarily need to fix, but they're things that you might want to be aware of depending on your resin 3D printing setup. The first one is, it's a really big machine considering the build plate size. Although it's a decent sized build plate, it's not like a Frozen Mega S, but it's almost the same size as my Frozen Mega S. And the biggest issue with this is that if you have a enclosure, like I've recommended in the past, getting one of those like grow tents that you can put a heater into, it doesn't necessarily fit into that. Not because the machine itself doesn't fit, but if you're using the resin cartridges that slot in and out, you need a lot of space above it, and it's already a tall machine. So if you've got a shelf, for example, that it goes onto, and normally you'd pour your resin into, even if the machine fits, the cartridges might not, because they slot in from the top and they slot out as well. This has kind of been alleviated. They brought out some new replacement resins that basically you get a bottle in the traditional sense and you can pour it in. And of course the machine works with third-party resins as well. So there is that, but it's just something to be mindful of. I can't put mine in my grow tent to then keep it heated or make it more efficient when it comes to heating, because it's just a bit too big. The next one is that build plate. So I mentioned in my review of this machine that the build plate's flat. So therefore the resin just doesn't drip off, and they can become very messy when it comes to just, removing the build plate. I have to use a scraper to scrape off the resin so that way it doesn't pour all over the place. Obviously that's something that can't be fixed. However, they have brought out a 3D printable attachment that you can do, which puts it at an angle. So almost like those older traditional resin 3D printers that came out where they had like a hook that you could put it onto and it drips off. So not necessarily a fix, but it is a workaround. And then of course, the last one is that resin vat. So the vat is a nice big vat, which is really good, but the pour spout on it is just really awful. When you go to pour it out, it just goes all over the place. It's a really kind of flat, shallow pour spout. So as it pours out, everything accumulates around the sides and then it starts to pour around the edges. You have to go really, really slow with this. It just needs a bit of a redesign for that vat, but again, that's physical. It can't necessarily be done at this stage, so probably a future iteration of machines. So let's talk about some of the things that they have fixed. So in my hands-on impression, I mentioned that after the machine has finished printing, the build plate will go up to a certain level and just stays there. And that can make it hard to remove it without resin dripping everywhere. Bear in mind that a resin pool's on the top, you can scrape it off that. But as you're removing it, it's then kind of hard to get like a drip tray or anything else underneath it. You then have to go into the settings and find the ability to manually move that build plate up and down, which is frustrating. They've now added a feature on the screen, so once it's finished printing, without having to go into any further menus, you can press a button and it takes the build plate right up to the top. It's a really, really good feature. I'm so glad it's there, because it just means it's so much easier just to get a drip tray underneath it, remove my plate, slide it off, and I don't get mess anywhere. So thank you. Another big one, and this is something that came up a few times in the comments about privacy and having to log in and having to use their slicer and all of that, which I do get. You don't always want to be online. People don't always have internet access, depending where you've got your printers and everything else. Can be a bit of an issue getting everything online. They've now added a completely no login and offline slicer as well. So if you don't want to log in and set up the machine that way and use a slicer online, you don't have to. It's completely offline. No login required, so that's a really big win. Obviously, there's going to be other things that people will want from the slicer, and hopefully they will come in the future, but they listened to that feedback, they brought it out, and that's just come out as part of one of their latest releases. There are a couple of other things as well that are in the pipeline that they've shown me as part of their roadmap, and one of the first ones is that you'll be able to have support profiles. So when you go in there and you do like your auto supports and your manual supports and everything, they're really good. I really enjoy using them. But every single time you do it, they reset, or at least for my experience, they do. So if I change anything, like the big one that I always change is the height that the model is lifted from the build platform, because it's really high as a default setting. So I lower that, but every single time I go to auto support, I have to change that manually. They're bringing in different support profiles, so depending on what sort of thing you're doing, you can change that up and you'll be able to preload your support profiles, which is a really big win. That would be really handy for if you're doing like larger models. If I'm doing a tank, for example, and I need bigger, thicker supports on there, being able to select my support profile will make that a big deal. Also, it's still not here, but the ability to print from the slicer isn't currently available. It is coming though, I've been told. I think it's meant to be coming this month, and I'm really excited for that. It sounds like such a silly thing, but I do all of my slicing and everything from in here. And once I've done all the maintenance stuff on my machine, so I'll go out there, I will remove the models, I'll clean it up, I'll check the vat, make sure there's no debris in there. And then when I come back in, I just want to be able to slice it and print from here, but I can't. I've got to slice it, then it sends it over to the machine. So that bit's nice, but then I've got to go back out to my machine and I've got to hit print, which is just frustrating. That's coming soon. Apparently it's going to be a fix. It'll be here in the very near future. So let's talk about some of the things that I would like to see from this printer and the slicer. And these are some slight issues that I've had. And the first one is I want to be able to preheat the machine from my slicer, or at least from the printer. Currently, when you hit print and if you have the heated mechanism and all of that, it will then start doing all its thing. It'll start preheating the vat and make sure that the resin gets to a nice temperature so it's going to print successfully. It'll then mix the resin, the build plate like goes up and down and up and down and up and down, and it mixes it all together, which is a really nice feature. But if I know I'm going to be printing in like half an hour or so, I just want to be able to start my printer doing that preheating process and then do the print, because it can take quite a while. I'm in the UK and we don't have heat, we don't have sunshine or anything like that. That's why I'm so pasty. And it's cold, so everything's in my garage. It does get cold in there. The grow tent helps with that, but obviously the machine doesn't fit in my grow tent at the moment, so it takes quite a while for that to preheat. It would be nice if I could preheat the machine and just get it going beforehand. Also, an ability when it comes to that temperature to set the temperature manually. It goes to 23 degrees, and then in my experience, it stays there when it's not too cold. We've had a couple of days recently where it's been about 7 or 8 degrees in my garage, and what I've found when I look at the reports or when I log into my printer whilst it's doing its print is the resin temperature is sitting around about 17 degrees. Now, I don't know if this is just because I can't set the resin temperature and the machine isn't picking up that it's gotten a little bit too cold, or if the heater just can't cope with the colder temperatures. My concern is that that's not that cold. So 7 or 8 degrees isn't that cold. And if the printer can only manage to stick to around about 17 degrees, as it gets colder in the UK, which it's going to, that's going to become an issue. So I will report back on that when I do a long-term review and let you guys know, as it gets colder in the UK, how does that hold up? And as if by magic, the UK got hit by a cold snap. So it's been about -4 overnight at the moment. In the garage, it's between -2 and -4, so nice and toasty out there. And I've run some of my prints overnight just to see whether or not they'd work. They come out successfully, and the temperature is staying around about 17 degrees. The thing that I'm finding odd is that the temperature reporting is just odd. When you first start printing on the machine, it'll show you the resin temperature, but then it'll also tell you what the ambient temperature is within the machine. But once it starts printing, I can't find that information anywhere. It just tells me 17 degrees. It just tells me one temperature. Now, I don't know if that's the ambient temperature or if that's the resin temperature. So the resin temperature might be higher. I'll feed it back to HeyGears and just find out if we can get some better reporting on what those temperatures look like in the future. And if I can't find them, that's just me being an idiot. But it does successfully print even in -2, -4 degrees. So that's a bonus. The next one, and this is again is about getting into the process of doing it, but the internal storage on the device can fill up quite quickly. Something they've added recently is you can add micro SD cards up to, I believe it's 1 terabyte, so a huge amount of storage on there. But if you don't do that, or things start to fill up, you can't delete anything from the printer from the slicer or from the app, which seems like a missed opportunity. So again, you have to go out to the printer, go in the history of the old files and delete them. It's not the end of the world. Once I've printed something, I can just go back in and delete it. But it would be great if there was something that would either offload the file once it's printed and then it sticks in my file library on the application, or from the slicer in the application or whatever, let me wirelessly or remotely remove things. But I can't. Again, you've got to manually interact with the machine. It's not a big deal, but it is just something to bear in mind, and it would be a nice feature to have. And on that topic, show me what storage I've got. I don't know how much storage is ever left on the machine. So the only way I know that I'm running out of storage is when I go to wirelessly send something from the slicer, it will say, yay, we're sending your sliced file over to the printer, and then it comes up with an error and it's saying, no, not doing it, not today, thanks. And that's the only way I ever know that I've run out of storage, so then I have to go out and clear off my storage. Again, I should just get in the habit of deleting older files as I do them, but I don't. But yeah, it would just be nice if it showed me how much storage was left on the machine and gave me a little bit more insight into what's actually happening with my machine. And the final one that I would like to see is a change to the upgrade process. They are starting to do better things. So beforehand, you couldn't see anything with regards to what you were actually upgrading. So the slicer would be like, hey, we've got a new version of this available. And it didn't show me any of like the upgrade logs or anything. It does now. So on the slicer side of things, if you upgrade it, it will tell you this is what you're getting. These are the new features of the slicer. It doesn't show it on the printer though. So if I go to upgrade the printer, I don't get any information about what's actually happening with my printer, what new functionality, what fixes are being made. I assume I can probably find them on the website, but if I've got this all-in-one slicer that's meant to be the hub and portal for this machine, I want to know, what are you doing to my machine? What's updated? What's changed? So that way I actually know if there's anything in there that I need to be aware of. And on that topic as well, the upgrade process is kind of frustrating. It's good in a way because it's better than pretty much any of the other resin printers that I've used. So it will show me on my slicer or the application that there is an upgrade available. And I can then click download and it automatically sends it across to the device, which is good. I've then got to go outside, go to the machine, interact with it, go to the upgrade section there and install the upgrade that's been sent. Again, it's like the printing thing. Why can I not just download and upgrade it, send it and install it? That would make it so much easier. Just add that functionality. Or let me do it all from the printer. So I can't go onto my printer and it shows me an update's available and download it and then install it. If there's an upgrade available, I've got to use the slicer to send it across to then go back out there and do it. Just do it on one of them or both. Let me do it all from the slicer or all from the printer. That'd be really nice because at the moment it's just frustrating. I think the biggest thing is, even though the software is really good, and even though the printer is really good and the software on the printer is really good, and they talk together pretty well, they're not quite fully enmeshed. And once they get that, will be there, but currently it's just not. There's these little things that you kind of come up against, and considering this is a consumer machine or a prosumer machine, I want as little friction between getting my files from here and interacting with my machine back and forth as possible. So once those changes get made, yeah, great. Currently not quite there. So moving across on some of the questions I've received on Discord and from the comments as well, and some of your concerns as well. So I figured I'd go through some of these and answer them. The one that I saw a lot of is, if they go out of business, you're left with a big paperweight, which I suppose is true of almost any resin 3D printing company, but it's not necessarily more true. Yes, the HeyGears Reflex RS is a more proprietary printer. You have to use their slicer. That's now kind of been alleviated though, because you can get their slicer and have a completely offline mode with no login required. So even if they do go out of business and stop supporting their slicer, doesn't really matter. You're still going to have a machine that works functionally exactly the same way as it currently does, with a slicer that works exactly the same way as it currently does. Problem is then, if there's any software bugs or anything that come up in the future, they won't necessarily be fixed. Also, the chances of them going out of business seem relatively slim because they're a relatively large company. They've just not been known as much in the consumer space. And the other thing that people were saying was that if they go out of business, it's not necessarily just because of the slicer, but because you won't be able to buy their resins anymore. Doesn't matter. You can use third-party resins with that, which I'll come on to in a moment, but that's not going to affect you. However, as all things considered, always do your own research, look into these things. At the end of the day, I'm just a YouTuber chatting, and this machine was sent over to me originally, free of charge, so there's probably going to be some bias there. So you guys have to do your own research and figure that out for yourself. So on that resin subject, one of the questions is, can you use your own resins? And I did mention in my hands-on that yes, you can. The ones that I've been using, so I tried out the Sunlu ABS light resin, Wargamer, the faux hammer one, which is really good resin. And my favorite one is the Nova 3D Tough resin. And I recently did a review video on this, and everything that I did with that resin was done on the HeyGears printer. And it's a really, really nice resin. It works very, very well with the HeyGears printer. I used it with the PAP 10 settings, so that way if you do go for this, and you buy that Nova Tough resin, use it with the PAP 10 settings, and it works perfectly fine. So yes, you can use third-party resins. The only ones that I've used so far that don't work was the Chitu, basically the Chitu Conjure resins that they do. So they're all basically the same. So Chitu, Conjure, and Jamhe are basically the same resin type, and they're hard to work with sometimes. So the Art Engineering resin was one of my favorite resins to use for miniatures, but it's really hard to work with. So it's no surprise that because you can't dial in your settings for it, it doesn't work on this printer. So again, something just to bear in mind. I'll do a future video where I test out loads of different resins. So my idea is that, like with my resin reviews, is I will always try to find out, does it work with the HeyGears printer? And if it does work with the HeyGears printer, what profile should you be selecting to coincide with the resin that you want to use? So that way you don't have to try it all out yourself. Hopefully I'll be able to get you a decent enough library of resins that work with it. Another thing that got asked was, how are the auto supports on this machine? Because I really like them, but some people talked about, they'd seen a particular video where there were a lot of almost like overexposure on the models, and it was leaving big puck marks and stuff like that. I've not personally had any issues with this, so I tend to use the auto supports all the time. And the thing that I really like about them is they're quite thick towards the bottom, as you'd expect. That's helping to basically secure the model to the build plate, make sure nothing falls off. But as it goes up the miniatures, they become almost like this spider web. So you get loads and loads of tiny supports all up the model. Now this has pros and cons, at least in my experience, in that when you remove those supports, you get very, very tiny like damage to the actual model surface, which is really good. So unlike some supports where they're quite big, and auto supports that I've used on other softwares in the past can sometimes just put them in stupid places and then you get like a crater or something like that. This doesn't have as much effect as it goes up the model. So like faces and hands and everything else, they're these tiny little spiderweb type supports, and they work really well. Problem is there's loads of them, so it's easy to remove them from the support as a whole, but then once you've removed that model from the support, you've got loads of these tiny little spiderweb ones you've then got to remove as well. I've not had any bad experiences with this so far. The vast majority of the time these auto supports work really well for me. They're easy to clean, easy to remove, and I don't have those like cratering issues. Again, everyone's mileage will vary depending on what sort of resin you're using. That will affect it. The machine calibration as well from factory, there's going to be different ones out there. Some of them will work better than others. It's just, I guess, the nature of technology. You might have a faulty batch. Who knows? Mine has worked fine. I really like the auto supports. I use them more now than I use pre-support. So if I get models, I tend to just get the unsupported model and then auto support them in the Blueprint software because I just get better results, at least in my experience. Another one that I saw come up a few times was that the wash machine looked really violent, and it does, you know, but it is my favorite wash machine that I've ever used. Now, the reason why people point it out as being violent is obviously we're printing miniatures, or at least I am, and I assume a lot of my audience are printing miniatures as well. And people were wondering, does anything break? You've got all these models in there that are kind of getting thrown around all over the place. So people are asking, does that break it? Does it cause any damage on the miniatures? I've not had anything break in there so far, and I've used it for every single thing that I've printed so far. No. So in my experience, no, it doesn't break the models. It doesn't cause them to get any damage or anything like that. Also, you can manually change how aggressive you want it to be, so you can slow it down. So that way, if you are worried about that, you can put it onto a slower setting. If you're doing something that's really delicate, again, you can put it onto a slower setting. But like I said, I've had quite a few models that I've done now on this that have really, really fine parts. None of them have come off broken. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. And the last one is, how fast is the machine really? I think it's fast. It's faster than other machines that I've used, but I'm the worst person to ask when it comes to this because I honestly don't care how fast my machine is. I just want it to work and work well and give me good quality with as minimal failures. And I've said this with pretty much every printer I've tested in the past because everyone always says, this is a really fast printer when it comes to like any of the ones I've tested. And I never put them on fast settings because I just want it to work every time. So I can't tell you, is it super fast compared to my other printers? It is faster than any of the other printers I've been using, but that's because I can't change the settings. Some of those other printers I've used in the past might be faster, but because I tinker with the settings on those ones, they go a little bit slower. What I have done though is I popped some screenshots up as I'm rambling on at the moment, so you guys can see. And these are some of the prints that I have done historically over the time of using this machine. So that way you can work it out yourself. So you can have a look at what the layer height is that I'm using, how long it takes, and how many layers. So that way you just get a bit of an overview of what that actually looks like. One thing to bear in mind though is it's really hard to nail down a number at this stage, because I've been using this machine through its like beta, and now it's in full release. So some of these results are basically as it transpires and it grows and it evolves, and that software is going to continue being updated. The vast majority of these results you're seeing on screen are after it's gone from its 1.0 version. So these should be the consumer speeds that you're seeing, and you can work it out yourself. But as I said, I'm one of the worst people to ask because I slow my machines down a lot of the time. But it is a fast machine. It does things really, really quickly. So I'm happy with the results. So that is it for this video. Like I said, I will do a follow-up once we get through the winter and everything, so I can see, you know, how well does that heater work? Do they deliver on all the other software bits there? I really, really like this machine. I currently have 2 resin printers hooked up. My Frozen Mega 8KS, because that's great for big projects and tanks and everything else, and the HeyGears printer. And the HeyGears Reflex RS is like my go-to one because it's just convenient. It tends to work pretty much all the time. I just really like it. It's a fantastic machine. But it isn't without its flaws. That's why I want to do this video, so you get a follow-up of that, some of the other things I've learned throughout the time. And again, when I do a future video, there'll probably be other things that I discover that frustrate me. And hopefully, a lot of these things will also get fixed. If you're wondering why I keep pointing over there, it's just where my notes are. So that's it. So if you've got any questions or feedback about this machine, drop them in the comments below or head on over to my Discord channel. The team over at HeyGears are really, really responsive to all the feedback they've been getting. The vast majority of these updates and upgrades and stuff that are getting fixed, like the offline slicer, the no login mode, being able to print directly from the machine, all of that is getting worked on as part of feedback that's come from earlier users of this machine, but also from the community. Bear in mind that this is a company that's moving from that business and I guess professional market into the prosumer and consumer space. They're wanting to get as much feedback as possible to make this machine, or at least your experience, as good as possible. So far, they've been really responsive to anything that I suggest to them, which is good. So if you do have feedback, it is worthwhile sharing it, because then hopefully they'll take that on board and they can fix it. I still really want to be able to tinker with the settings. If they bring that to their slicer, or at least give other slicers the ability to work with this machine, that would be the biggest win. And I said that in my first hands-on video for it. I still stand by that. If they can do that, it'd be great. Make their slicer amazing and make people actually want to use it. It is a really good slicer, by the way. I actually prefer using it over something like Lychee, but that's just me. But make people want to use it, but also give them the freedom to use it elsewhere if they want to. To me, that just makes better business sense. But we'll see if that happens in the future. So thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I will see you in the future. Bye.